So just recently I asked my Twitter followers, can you tell me the very first slasher movie? Now I don't know if it's technically the first, but it might be. So let's review the classic Peeping Tom. Peeping Tom stars Karl Bohm, Anna Massey, Maura Shearer, and is directed by Michael Powell. What's up, guys? Welcome to a patron request. This is for Thomas Jones, and boy did he give me a good one, an iconic one to review. This is the first time I've ever seen Peeping Tom. I've always wanted to see it ever since I saw Scream 4, as many of us have. I've never heard of the movie, but there's this scene in Scream 4 where you got Kirby at the end. I think it's the scene where she's just throwing off all these different movies at Ghostface. But I think one of the questions he asked her was, what is the very first slasher movie, or something like that. I haven't seen Scream 4 in a few years, okay, damn it, give me some slack.
The movie that started the slasher craze. Halloween, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Last House on the Left, or Psycho?
Psycho!
None of the above. Peeping Tom, 1960, directed by Michael Powell. First movie to ever put the audience in the killer's POV.
But anyway, looking forward to diving into Peeping Tom. And if you remember, there is kind of a call out to Peeping Tom in Halloween Resurrection. One of the kills, he's using a tripod and he pointing it right at the cameraman. And at the time when I saw that, I'd never even heard of Peeping Tom. So I was wondering, what is this kill? So now I know.
My interest is in fear.
Have you gone crazy?
Go away!
So anyway, let's give you a quick plot synopsis. Our main character of Peeping Tom is Mark Lewis. I would call him a sympathetic villain, which is one of the reasons why I think this movie got in trouble. We'll get into the backstory. But he is a cameraman, camera assistant, and he is kind of obsessed with finding, I guess, the perfect shot and going so far as wanting to capture fear. You see, he is a serial killer, and each victim, he is obsessed with the technicality of it. He sees them as more of an object than an actual person. I think his mind just gets so clouded, just getting everything right as in terms of the kill. But the one thing that really is creepy about this movie is he has this distorted mirror that he points at the victims so they can see their own death. Can you imagine that?
When they felt the spike touching their throat and knew I was going to kill them, I made them watch their own deaths. And if death has a face, they saw that too.
If you had a mirror pointed at your face and you see a distorted version of your face in your last moment, that is some creepy shit, and that's what he does with these victims. Maybe that's what got him in trouble too. I don't know. 1960, people. But Peeping Tom is much more than what's on the surface, much more than just a typical slasher movie, and I'd say it might be the first. But there's a whole psychology to this character, and the movie definitely goes beneath the surface and shows why he is the way he is, what his backstory is like. He had this father that was a photographer. He wanted to use his son as a test subject, and he would do all these tests to show his son's reaction to the fear. Even going so far as to his son witnessing his mother's death. She's laying there on the bed, and he wanted to capture his son's reaction. Now, diving into the backstory of Peeping Tom, Peeping Tom is one of Martin Scorsese's favorite films. This is one of those cases of a lost film. When Peeping Tom came out, it was only in theaters for 5 days, and then it was taken out of theaters. Critics ripped this movie to shreds. They absolutely hated it. And one of the big reasons is because Michael Powell used his own son in the movie. And this is a movie about, a serial killer. So it was sort of a situation of art imitating life, because the main character had a father in the movie that would subject him to these tests of fear. I've done a lot of research. It's hard for me to pinpoint the exact thing that really just set critics on edge with this movie. I think it's a combination of quite a few things. I think one being that they wanted you to feel bad for this murderer. And he's not just a normal murderer, it's a very sadistic way of killing a victim. Also, this is the first British movie where you would see a naked woman. Or maybe it's just the first, like, I guess, bigger studio movie, because I'm sure nudity had existed in maybe like independent films before that. I'm not sure. But this is like the first with a, you know, a major budget studio, all that. And it's the scene with Millie at the end of the movie. And like Ghostface stated in Scream 4, it's one of the first where you see the killer's point of view. Now, I went on to Twitter and asked the question, and I guess there are a couple of other movies that actually showed the killer's point of view. And as far as being the very first slasher movie, I got to give a shout out to Slasher in Suits. He quotes 13 Women from 1932, perhaps the earliest example of what would become a slasher film. It documents 11, not 13, as 2 women's scenes were cut before theatrical release. Women being harassed and murdered after a clairvoyant Swami mails them a horoscope foreseeing swift doom. So, I mean, you could trace this stuff back so far, and I guess it comes down to what is your distinct definition of a slasher film. To me, this feels like a slasher film through and through because it's one killer. We see the killer's point of view. He is stalking victims. To me, stalking is a big part of what a slasher film is. That's why I've always had this argument with people about Texas Chainsaw Massacre not being a slasher. I don't consider it a slasher because Leatherface isn't stalking anyone. They happen to come to him. But, you know, I could get into a huge debate. I've done videos on it, and it's just my personal opinion. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, if it's a slasher to you, then it's a slasher, and that's fine. But Peeping Tom was a film that was lost in time. You know, it ended Michael Powell's career pretty much altogether. And the rights were sold to a distributor that, let's just say, were less than reputable. They didn't do anything to really market the movie after that. It was lost in time. And then Martin Scorsese, 20 years later, actually bought the rights to the film, and he gave it a new life. He would literally show it in theaters just to kind of honor this film that he loved so much. I've even talked about like Black Christmas and how it was kind of lost in time, and then Quentin Tarantino helped raise some awareness of that film. And then it was in the 25 Years of Terror documentary for Halloween. And I think that documentary might have opened people's eyes to Black Christmas, and now Black Christmas is what Black Christmas is, one of the greatest horror films of all time. But also, you can definitely see the influence in Peeping Tom with other films like Polanski's Repulsion, a lot of Giallo films. There's definitely some Giallo cinematography, lighting in this movie. And this movie came out a month before Psycho. But what's interesting is that Mark Lewis is a very similar character to Norman Bates. They are sympathetic villains. And it's interesting to me that Psycho really didn't receive any kind of negative flack, whereas Peeping Tom, completely opposite story as far as the reception of the movie, not the actual plot of the movie. So maybe there was some Hollywood influence there. Maybe because the critics liked Psycho, that, you know, it became untarnished. I guess that just goes to show too how much power critics have. At least they did back then. I don't know about today. Not as much, but back then, you know, people really held on to what critics stated, and I think that's power. You know, these people had the power to actually end the life of a movie, and even worse, a director. I don't think a critic has that much power these days. I mean, hell, there's so many movies where the critics hated it and the audience loved it, you know, that's Rotten Tomatoes for you. So it gets immediate access out to the viewers most of the time before they even see the critic scores. And I wonder if a movie like Peeping Tom came out in a landscape like today, would it have suffered so much? I don't think it would have, because it's a beautifully directed film by Michael Powell. And I like that the main character is in the movie business and he's a cinematographer, and that just kind of adds a new debate to the movie. Like, can cinema be dangerous? Because that's what happens in this movie. He becomes obsessed with cinema and finding the perfect shot, and it can really destroy your life. I mean, you could even look at directors like Kubrick, who some say was kind of obsessed with finding the perfect shot. David Fincher, You know, these are guys that would do 100 takes. Now, there's this character named Lily, played by Pamela Green, and I think if you do some research behind the scenes, you'll see her name a lot because she talks about this experience and how she was extremely comfortable with doing nudity, but as soon as she stepped in front of the camera, it was a completely different story, and she was kind of terrified. But she has a very famous scene in the movie because she is the actress that does the nude scene at the end of the movie. It's a lot of pressure too, being that you are technically the first actress to be nude in a British film. But you can read behind the scenes on that experience for her and how awkward it was. And Michael Powell literally had his 2 sons by the camera while she was naked. And, you know, that's just a strange thing to do. And the movie is bookended by her because at the beginning of the movie, when Mark goes to the news agent, and that scene's interesting because you'll have these like businessmen coming in and they want to buy like a newspaper or whatever, but what they really want to do is see pictures of naked women. And Mark had a job where he would take photos upstairs in the news agent, and he would take scantily clad photos or even naked photos of women for the owner. And so Millie was one of those characters. And this is a really weird scene too, because then you have this other model who has like a disfigured face. And just to show like, I guess the fetishes that some people have, some men might have. They want to see a woman with a disfigured face because when he sees her, when Mark sees her, he immediately is interested in taking a picture, you know, because it's an interesting subject. Everything is a subject to this guy. It's not an actual person. I also like, you know, how they show the point of view at the very beginning of the movie, and you see like kind of the crosshairs as he's zeroing in on his prey, and you see the prostitute at the beginning of the movie. Also, there's this character, Helen, who is kind of the main love interest of the movie. She lives in the apartment that Mark owns. Anna Massey just kind of reminds me of, I guess, the landlord's daughter in Spider-Man 2 for some reason. Just the same type character. But you can tell that she's really feels for Mark. She can tell that there's something a little bit messed up beneath the surface, and she's attracted to him. And so she's in like the final scene of the movie, and this is where I'll go into a little bit of spoiler stuff just in case you haven't seen Peeping Tom. But, you know, the big showdown at the end, she's trying to reach him, and then he ends up killing himself with his tripod. All the kills are with his tripod in this movie, by the way.
I'm afraid.
But Anna Massey said behind the scenes, she didn't know that this movie was as sadistic as it was because when she shot her scenes, she didn't see all these other crazy scenes and death scenes around her. So she didn't know what type of movie this was going to be. I don't know if she fully read the script or not, but she just had a different experience. And she said when she saw the movie, she hated it. And I think she still hated it for, you know, the rest of her life. I don't even know if Anna Massey is alive today, but it's interesting that her perception of the movie turned out to be completely different than what it turned out to be. And I have to mention one of the most iconic scenes, one of the most memorable scenes in the movie is with this stand-in, played by Maura Shearer. She plays Vivian. She's a stand-in for this actress who is a hella prima donna. She's doing like this musical number because Mark and her, they decided to work on a film together on the side. But she doesn't know that he's planning on killing her. He's working up to this. Mark is a very patient type of killer, and he will not kill until he gets the shot perfectly right. And so it's interesting that she doesn't know what's about to happen. And I like how that scene, it's not quick, it's not abrupt, it lingers. And she's doing this nice musical dance number, and you know what's to come. You know, the viewer knows what's to come, Mark knows what's to come, but she doesn't know what's to come. And so when it does finally come, it's kind of terrifying. And really, most of the kills in this movie, they're not on screen. But it's so effective just because of the character study of this guy. Just he as a person is quite terrifying. It's all beneath the surface. At face value, he looks just like a normal, good-looking guy. But he is a stone-cold killer. So I gotta give Peeping Tom a Trapped on an Island. This is a phenomenal film, beautifully directed by Michael Powell. Love the 60s aesthetic to the movie. And I think it's so groundbreaking for not just one thing, not just the whole slasher element, but just you can look at so many films that came out after Peeping Tom and you can see the influence. And I love that this movie finally did find its day thanks to Martin Scorsese. And this might be the oldest movie I've ever reviewed, which is kind of cool. So let me know your thoughts on Peeping Tom down in the comments. It's on Tubi right now. You can watch it for free. Also, be sure to come over to Killer Flicks, where we talk horror all day and every day, and on Fridays, Review for Fridays. Follow me Drumdums on my socials. Support me on Patreon. Buy me a coffee. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a good day. Drumdum out. But, you know, you can read behind the scenes on that. What the fuck?